Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Okay. Hey guys. Um Thank God. Okay, I'm getting better at checking. Hope you guys are all doing well. Good. Awesome. I hope. Yeah. Mark Felton video. Britain's shrinking military. From Cold War Colossus to cash-strapped Shadow. Yee. Preemptive like. Hi guys, if you're new, my name is Connor. I am from Rhode Island, New England, USA, in that order. And I like to learn things. Learn with me. Let's go. Hit all the buttons. The big red button, just not the bad one. I just took a shower, so I'm waking up. I don't have my coffee with me, but I don't need it.
Many of you have probably noticed that some politicians seem pretty keen to involve NATO in some sort of shooting war with Russia over Ukraine. Obviously, no one is proposing a nuclear war, but rather a conventional conflict. But apart from the United States, are NATO countries even remotely able to conduct such a war with the forces at their disposal? After the US, Britain has always been the #2 NATO power in terms of military strength and capability. But are the British armed forces configured for large-scale conflict with Russia? As a historian, I can say no, because the last time Britain fielded military forces specifically designed to counter Russian aggression in Europe was in 1991, at the tail end of the Cold War, the year the Soviet Union collapsed. An awful lot has changed for the British Armed Forces in over 30 years, as successive governments have cut defence spending and the size of the armed forces, confident that no...
Sorry, my brother's only 2 years older than me, but it's funny that he has been alive, although shortly, while the Soviet Union was still a thing, and yet I haven't. I was born in 93, so, alright, sorry.
Large cut defence spending and the size of the armed forces, confident that no large-scale conventional war in Europe would ever be fought again. So let's compare the different sizes, the different parts of the British Armed Forces today, with the military that was specifically designed to counter Soviet aggression 3 decades ago. By any measure, the figures are shocking and should probably convince most reasonable people that engaging in a massive conventional war with a country as large as Russia is not desirable and perhaps even possible. And this is not just me saying it, but also plenty of retired admirals, generals, and...
Sorry, my back freaking... Ah, there we go, it itches, sorry.
And this is not just me saying it, but also plenty of retired admirals, generals, and air marshals, and a few serving ones too, not to mention the United States itself, which commented very recently that Britain's armed forces are simply too small to do the job anymore. None of this is a reflection of the brilliant men and women who serve in the British Armed Forces. This video is not a criticism of any of them. It is rather of the policies that have led to this current state of affairs.
Of course.
So let's begin with the all-important subject of cash, the use of taxpayers' money to fund the military. Now, it reveals that successive governments since the end of the Cold War have preferred to cut expenditure on defence matters and put the money into other things. This may be correct or it may not be. However, in 1991, the defense budget was 4.11%.
I'm sorry, guys. What did he just say? I was too busy looking at the...
Defense governments since the end of the Cold War have preferred to cut expenditure on defense matters and put the money into other things.
Okay.
This may be correct or it may not be. However, in 1991, the defense budget was 4.11%. In 2021, this had shrunk to just 2.5%. The Royal Navy has always been the backbone of Britain's defences, and indeed, Britain has always maintained a large navy and a small regular army. However, the situation...
I feel like 4.1%, 2.5% I still think is pretty high, isn't it? And 4.1, I don't know the US percentage.
Maintained a large navy and a small regular army. However, the situation today is we have a small regular army and an equally small Royal Navy. This can be a problem because we are an island nation. We import most of what we need to survive. The Navy is also supposed to project power all over the world via its ships, submarines, and aircraft. The Navy of 1991 was specifically configured to counter Soviet aggression in northern waters. The Navy today has shrunk to a shadow of its former self. In 1991, the Royal Navy had 63,000 full-time personnel. The figure today is about 30,000. Of course, fewer personnel are required because the fleet has shrunk to such a small number of ships in 30 years of defence cuts. In 1991, the Royal Navy fielded a fleet of 29 submarines. Today it has only 10. Now, no matter how capable modern submarines may be, and they are certainly much more capable than those of the 1980s and 90s, no one can seriously consider 10 submarines can do the job of 29 former vessels. With such a tiny fleet, how many of those submarines would be in refit, having maintenance done at any one time? A handful of active submarines, as with any other vessel, aircraft or vehicle, cannot be everywhere at once. Fewer equals less coverage and less impact on the battle. Aircraft carriers are one area where things seem to be improving.
I just want to say it before I forget. I'm going to go back like 10 seconds so I don't pause and then not hear the sentence I paused on. I've been trying to think of a way to word this and not sound too stupid, but it's the United Kingdom is in NATO. So an attack on the United Kingdom is an attack on NATO. NATO has an enormous army, so the size of the United Kingdom's army isn't necessarily determinative of the safety of the United Kingdom because they're in NATO. But I wonder if there's also a more kind of psychological effect with how other nations will want to interact with you or cozy up to you or see you as a more important ally as we're going into a more uncertain geopolitical time without, obviously the Russian invasion of Ukraine is one, but I don't think that this is just a blimp and then we're just going to go back to peace like before. But I think there might also be value in having a large military yourself, despite being already in a giant military alliance. Just, I think the way people look at you and will want to do business with, I think there's a lot more that goes into a big military when dealing with other nations than just the protection of your country. Does that make sense? That's a thought. Okay, continue.
Fewer equals less coverage and less impact on the battle. Aircraft carriers are one area where things seem to be improving. In 1991, the Royal Navy fielded 3 small aircraft carriers, carrying the famous Sea Harrier jet. Today, the Royal Navy has 2 enormous Queen Elizabeth-class aircraft carriers. The bill for each of these vessels over £3 billion. But few aircraft actually equip them, having only 26 F-35B Lightnings for ships designed to accommodate 24 to 36 such aircraft each. Though enormously capable aircraft and enormously capable ships, how long could they remain in action before combat losses, maintenance issues, pilot losses and fatigue, etc. remove them from the battle? The new carriers need destroyers and frigates to protect them, and also to carry out a range of tasks across the fleet, from patrol and escort duties, anti-aircraft and
I'm sorry, that's so freaking cool.
Tasks across the fleet, from patrol.
How does it stay stable if the propulsion or is in the back of the plane? You'd think it'd like push the back up. Maybe there's other jets pushing up smaller ones in the front of the aircraft?
From patrol and escort duties, anti-aircraft and anti-missile warfare and anti-submarine warfare and so on. In 1991, the Royal Navy possessed an astounding 51 destroyers and frigates. Today, that number has shrunk to just 18 vessels, which, even taking into account advances in missile technology, ship design, anti-submarine warfare, etc., is still far below the number the Royal Navy actually wants. For example, the Type 45 class guided missile destroyer, the Royal Navy's most modern class of destroyer, numbers only 6 vessels. Originally, the Royal Navy was to have had 12, but the government of the day cut 50% of the vessels to save money. These are just a few of the facts and figures regarding the Royal Navy. Turning to the British Army, in 1990 to 91, the army was very large and designed to counter...
I did not realize just how big these cuts were.
Just a few of the facts and figures regarding the Royal Navy. Turning to the British Army, in 1990 to 91, the army was very large and designed to counter a Soviet attack across the North German plains and into Scandinavia. Manpower stood at 153,000 personnel. Today, the army has shrunk by 30 years of endless amalgamations and cuts to just 86,000 personnel, plus around 30,000 or so in the Army Reserve, the renamed Territorial Army, who are being asked increasingly to do the same job as regular personnel and go on long overseas tours with regular forces. Any large-scale war with Russia will involve tanks, lots and lots of tanks. That's something the war in Ukraine has shown absolutely abundantly. In 1991, the British Army had some 1,200 tanks, including about 800 tanks deployed in Western Germany. Today, the Army has only 223 Challenger 2 tanks in service, and reports show recently in the press that many of these vehicles are unserviceable and not fit for purpose. An army that is so small cannot sustain large-scale operations for very long before casualties, mechanical issues, wear and tear, etc. force it to start taking troops from elsewhere. Replacements would presumably have to come from the Army Reserve, but the number of fit, available and willing reservists that could be sent into action to support the regulars is probably well below the government's target of 30,000, which in itself is a tiny number. For example, the Territorial Army in 1991 numbered 73,000 personnel, almost the size of the regular army today. The government would need to call back to the colours the Regular Reserve, a pool of trained former regular soldiers contractually committed to recall in times of emergency. However, the Regular Reserve stands at around 20,000 liable personnel, again a tiny pool. Looking at all the other aspects of the British Army, from artillery guns to rocket systems to armoured personnel carriers to all sorts of different types of equipment, we see that they have very good equipment but not very much of it, and too few people for the amount of commitments the British Army is already involved in around the world. The Royal Air Force would of course play a vital role in any conventional war with Russia and her allies, but again the service is but a shadow of its Cold War size and strength. In 1990, the Royal Air Force numbered 90,000 personnel, that is 5,000 more people than the current British Army. Today, the Royal Air Force is down to just over 33,000 personnel. The jet fighter force has dramatically diminished. In 1989, the RAF had an astounding 850 frontline attack jets of all types. This figure is down to only 137. In 1989, the RAF had an astounding 850
Are those wings extending?
frontline attack jets of all types. This figure is down to only 137 Typhoons, and of that number, 22 are two-seat trainers that don't go to war. So realistically, the RAF's frontline combat strength amounts to just 115 aircraft. It also operates a small number of F-35Bs with the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm. Factoring in attrition, mechanical issues, pilot issues, how would the RAF squadrons remain operational in the event of all-out war, and for how long? These are problems that could not be solved in the short term. The equipment is highly expensive and highly complex, and aircrew require years of very careful and expensive training. So these are just a few comparisons that can be made between the British Armed Forces of the early 1990s, when, as I said, it was designed to counter Soviet aggression in Northern Europe, and the armed forces of today that many politicians would like to see sent into some kind of combat situation against Russia, especially as any action against the Russians would be very similar to those kind of military operations that were planned against the Soviet Union in the 1960s, 70s, 80s and early 90s.
I have a big question about that, guys. It would be similar. Oh, okay. Wait.
Since the Soviet Union in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and early 90s.
My mistake. I thought he was gonna say the Soviet. Never mind. Yeah, I was thinking like World War II. They were on our. Never mind. There actually it still is a question I can ask along that line. Yeah, actually, I am gonna. Is any situation of Russia being invaded even a possibility, since wouldn't that mean all-out nuclear war? I mean, if NATO invades Russia or Russia ever invades NATO, don't both sides know that it's like, okay, both sides know that that's mutually assured destruction, but does that mean that you're going to, if you are losing, you're going to sit back and let your country be captured and occupied after a war? And so I agree on mutually assured destruction, but I don't agree or know what exactly would happen. Okay, maybe sides don't react with nukes at the beginning of war, but are you saying that if the Soviet Union defeats NATO in a ground war and is at the brink of Berlin or Paris, London's on it's on an island, so it's going to be more difficult, but that we wouldn't retaliate with nukes rather than have a Soviet occupation of NATO, or vice versa, a NATO occupation of... So if NATO is on the verge of capturing Moscow and putting Russia under NATO, at that point, you don't think it might be likely that they would rather have mutually assured destruction than one side destruction? And so that's my question, is like, would a conventional war ever happen because there are nuclear weapons? And so, yeah, I wonder what you guys think about that. Really interesting. Again, I want to say I'm not an expert, but I would say that Mark Felton is an expert. And the fact that he's kind of ringing the bells and whatnot is... It seems as if from this video that Britain is kind of giving up on its role as a military power to be looked at in times of trouble by other nations. And so I think that knowing that you are safe because you're in a military alliance, I don't know if that's justification of cutting your military this much. And I say that because, one, yeah, you're in NATO defensively, but in terms of applying your influence across the world, or being at the winners table or of discussions or anything, that you're essentially unable to do anything yourself. Anything that you want to do across the world in order to influence something, you can't do it. You have to, like, NATO has to do it, And so I think that might be importance in the image of you being a strong military power, more than just the fact that, you could yourself more easily counter an invasion by, say, Russia or something in that scenario. And I don't know. I think that other countries might look at you and see you as less crucial, I guess. And I don't think that is insignificant. I'm not saying that you got to be the U.S. style, intervene everywhere across the world, place people in governments across. I'm not saying you got to go the U.S. route of monitoring everything, right? But at the same time, being completely helpless besides like being in a greater NATO family, I think that that image might be more harmful than more money going into the military. Not positive, just a thought. Really cool video. Love you guys. Hope you're all doing well. And yeah, can't wait to see your comments. If you can teach me stuff, tell me. I believe me, I love being told I'm wrong. I'm probably wrong a lot. So you don't have to hold back in the comments. Please discuss what you want to discuss. Tell me where I'm wrong, and I'd love to see that. All right. See you guys next time. Bye, guys.